Entrando em contato com atendimento ao cliente... Para muitas pessoas é um jeito fácil de arruinar um bom dia, mas na Zendesk nós deixamos a experiência do cliente melhor. Melhor para sua avó, melhor para o seu vendedor preferido de flores, melhor para o cara do apartamento 3A, melhor para você, melhor para todos. Porque enquanto alguns dizem que o cliente sempre tem razão, nós dizemos que o cliente é sempre humano. E como seres humanos, queremos fazer algo melhor para todos nós. Zendesk, experiência do cliente com IA desenvolvida para humanos.
Hello, everybody. Gabby here.
And I'm Steven Stakuyi. Hi, everyone.
And we are still in Europe. So this week, we have a special episode for you. This week, Steven will be doing the episode because he actually researched it based off of a TikTok that I saw like 4 days ago that...
You mentioned in a bus. You have to tell the story about the bus and what specifically happened.
On a bus back from Salzburg, talking to some people on our Christmas market trip, like Jake and Marisol. And I was telling them like, oh yeah, this black metal band from Norway, you know, this whole insane story happened. And they were like, oh, you think that's insane? Guess what? And then they like gave the full story. It was insane. Okay. But before we jump into it, I just want to note that today's episode covers, Steven, give the disclaimer.
Okay, so preemptively, right from the get-go, this is going to cover murder. This is going to cover gore. This is going to cover a lot of uncomfortable shit that is going to potentially depress and or stress a lot of people out. So if this is something that displeases you, that makes you uncomfortable, I recommend that you not listen.
Yeah, go find another lighter episode that, you know, of our podcast.
All right. So then on that note, okay, going into this, Gabby, when you or someone out there thinks of the death of a rock star, what is the first thing that typically comes to your mind for like how it is that a rock star typically dies?
Like an overdose or maybe suicide?
Yes, like literally the two most common ways that we hear about the deaths of like stars are usually that. It is very rare when we talk about these things that murder is the actual cause of that. Murder between bandmates. Even less, like usually when a rock star or someone gets murdered, it's because of like a crazy fan or something like that. Murder between bandmates after years of satanic activity, arson, suicide by another member, and then wishing misery and pain upon the entire world.
The entire world.
Literally the entire. I'm not even exaggerating when I talk about that because there is really only one case that we can talk about when it comes to that specific thing because of just how incredibly rare and insane all of this is. My friends, for those of you who are listening to this, again, I told you from the very get-go that this was going to have a lot of dark themes in it. This is the story of Mayhem, one of the most prominent and infamous black metal bands of Norway in the 1990s, whose actions would easily go down in history as, well, I mean, for one of the worst reasons possible. There's a lot of controversy, not just surrounding like one specific issue. Like I had to skip past so much of the baggage behind each one of these people going into this because, oh dear God, I'm pretty sure not a single one of them is unscathed from something that they were doing.
Okay, so I just know like the rough draft that I gathered by going down a TikTok rabbit hole and then like a little Wikipedia rabbit hole, but I'm assuming there's more than just the overall controversy that Mayhem had.
Oh, there's so much more. Again, we're talking murder. We're talking suicide. We're talking arson. We are talking neo-Nazism.
What?
Yes. Yeah. There's all different kinds of stuff that goes into this, like neo-pagan esoteric ideology. Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself when I talk about this.
Okay.
If we're going to talk about any of the subjects that I'm talking about here, the murder, arson, everything, I have to explain a little bit about the genre of black metal itself so that both you and to the listener here that is listening to this right now can kind of understand more of the setting that this story is taking place in the first place. Because first off, I'm not a musical historian.
Right.
I am a person that I enjoy metal music, but my preferred type of metal is usually more of the symphonic or power metal. I love things that are like ballads, and I find them to be very invigorating and strong. Black metal is not that. It is, I'm going to put it very mildly, not my cup of tea.
Okay. You don't like black metal? I mean, I don't like black metal. I like some of the darker stuff, like not the extra dark stuff, you know, but
there is a difference. And a lot of people end up confusing the terms, which is something that creates a bit of an issue. So when you get into the nitty gritty of it, black metal is oftentimes confused for death metal, which it's not. It is not the same thing. So if you enjoy some of the darker or thrash or anything like that, that's not what black metal is. Black metal is something that is a bit of a subgenre. It combines elements of thrash and death metal, and it's famous for, again, this is putting it mildly, socially unacceptable lyrics. You will understand as I go on what it is that I'm talking about. Powerful instrumentation, and the also sheer amount of controversies that some of the most prominent artists that actually are proponents of black metal end up getting wrapped in. Now, when I say this, I do not want to demonize the genre. I am not going to do that, and I'm not going to tell people that the music is crap, because obviously everyone can kind of have their own taste on what it is that they feel like. I don't want to say that.
I mean, if you listen to Diggy Diggy Hole and
which is an icon,
it,
which is an icon,
then you're not really like the
Joya
ultimate
also loves it. Our daughter
judge.
loves that song.
I
She
mean,
loves both the regular one and the metal version.
I'm just saying, music, you know, it's all subjective. So
yes. But one of the key reasons I'm not going to demonize this genre is because if I did, the more extreme proponents of it would actually be really happy and get exactly what they want, which is being treated like demons and outcasts. Look, traditionally, black metal bands tend to use quite a bit of shrieking, screaming, and snarling, along with lyrics that do things like typically attack Christianity and symbols of power. They oftentimes would use apocalyptic language and anti-authoritarian and anti-establishment messages against religious governments and societies. And on that note, satanic lyrics are very common, and many see them as a core part of black metal. If not praising Satan, many black metal groups would call for the outright just abandonment of Christianity and a return to the old pagan ways, particularly in the Scandinavian countries where it is very common. So this was really big in Norway, in Denmark, and Sweden and Finland.
That is so not what I would expect from there.
Yeah, we're talking about groups that, okay, this is a thing that is going to come up later. Neo-paganism is something that arose and became more common, specifically out of like the 1930s going into the 1940s.
Oh.
With the Nazis and New Age religious spiritual movements that wanted to abandon the old Western ways and bring back the pure pagan faith of before, the faith of their ancestors, the rejection of outsiders and foreigners.
Right. Why it always got to be like that?
Yes, that is a part that is going to tie into this. In fact, when we talk about this, one of the key developments that would occur in the 90s because of the black metal scene is a series of arsons where churches were attacked and burned to the ground.
Like by the metal bands?
By the metal bands. Like, no, here's the thing. A lot of people think, oh, like by people who were fans of the bands. No, I mean by literally the bands themselves. Like the famous people were going around and attacking things and committing terrorist acts.
Like the successful musicians.
Yes. I am not even kidding.
All right. I mean, that is one way to really pivot from a successful career to a criminal career.
So remember when I said before that it's like one of the key things that would mark the genre is the controversy surrounding some of its most prominent people? Yeah, you have the controversy of, oh, I said a bad word 10 years ago, and oh yeah, I committed an act of domestic terrorism.
Oh my God.
They're very different things for what specifically happened. See, by the year 1996, there had been at least 50 attacks in Norway, and in every single case that was solved, those that were responsible were black metal fans, or like the artist themselves. Some of the buildings were hundreds of years old and were really big historical landmarks for their area. So it was a huge, like, it was a loss. I say this as a person who loves history. This fundamentally angers me on a most base level. Like in the same thing for what happened here in Syria, which I'm now doing a deep dive in Syria because of my own on YouTube, where I'm going to be doing the whole thing for the Syrian civil war, when ISIS came in and their first action after taking over an area was to destroy Roman ruins because those were symbols of the pagan past. They were doing this, but to churches.
To the Christianity, so that they can go back to their pagan past.
Yes.
So they want to eradicate Christianity so that their old religions can come back to be the prominent religions?
Yes, but they don't actually believe that they're going to be able to do that. It's more so a lashing out of violence and revenge. They don't actually think that they're going to be able to make a change and convince people.
So then why are they doing it? It's pointless if you don't think you can make a change.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. Because over the course of doing all this research, every single one of these people from their ideology fundamentally pissed me off because they have no actual basis for how they can make any real change. Their literal sum, if I can sum them up in a couple words, it is angry, whiny bitches who just want to complain and yell about the world and scream and commit horrible acts, and you will see what I mean.
Okay.
Look, I'm not going to spoil it. That is just, this is the setting for the scene that we're getting into. So now this band, Mayhem, which, yes, that is the name of the band. What is the story behind this?
It's a good name.
It is actually a good name. It really is. And it does fit exactly what we are going to be covering here today, because holy shit, is this story absolute mayhem.
Entrando em contato com atendimento ao cliente. Para muitas pessoas é jeito fácil de arruinar bom dia. Mas na Zendesk, nós deixamos a experiência do cliente melhor. Melhor para sua avó, melhor para seu vendedor preferido de flores, melhor para o cara do apartamento 3A, melhor para você, melhor para todos. Porque enquanto alguns dizem que o cliente sempre tem razão, nós dizemos que o cliente é sempre humano. E como seres humanos, queremos fazer algo melhor para todos nós. Zendesk, experiência do cliente com IA desenvolvida para humanos.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.
So, inspired by bands like Bathory, Motorhead, Black Sabbath, Slayer, Venom, and more, Mayhem is something that would form in 1984 in Norway around a cast of characters who adopted very specific names to fit in with the new genre that they were helping to promulgate. Because the 80s is where black metal came about, and there was like two waves. You had one in the 80s, and you then had one in the 90s. And they ended up being part of the 90s, but they fermented in the 80s. You had the bassist, Necro Butcher, which that is, I'm going to use a lot of their names in here, and it's going to go kind of interchangeably, but that is Jorn Stubrund, who is Necro Butcher. You have the guitarist, Euronymous, who is Oystein Asreth. You have the drummer, Jell Mannheim. And these are the core people that would go and start the band. After releasing the demo, Pure Fucking Armageddon.
Oh my God.
Which, yes, that was the name.
It's a good name.
The trio that would then go and recruit a vocalist called Maniac.
Oh my God.
Which was Sven Erik Christensen, who made his studio debut on the band's 1987 debut EP, Death Crush.
Also a really good name.
Yes. A lot of this is really edgy. However, after all this happened, Mannheim and Maniac would leave the band the following year, and they were replaced by the drummer, Hellhammer.
Oh my God. The names are just getting better and better.
I know, but wait for it. This is the peak. Vocalist, dead.
Okay, that was just not as...
His name was literally just dead.
Impactful. Is that the one that died?
Spoiler,
sorry.
I love how you're predicting this. You don't even know what's happening with the story, but yes, he is the guy. He is one of the people who dies.
Oh boy.
The leader of whom became very notorious for his commitment to his particular name.
God.
And no, I'm not saying that as a pun. I'm not saying that as a pun based off him dying. I am saying that is part of like his actual activities.
What?
Look, you know how stars and celebrities and musicians can be kind of eccentric people and they just kind of do things at different points?
Yeah.
And you know how sometimes the people who are famous for particular acts of extremeness in one degree or other could do some more extremely provocative things on stage?
Yeah. I feel like it takes a special type of person to take the spotlight that comes with fame on any level. And so they're typically going to be eccentric because you have to be weird enough to deal with fame.
Yes. So even among all the different kinds of personalities that could appear in the black metal scene, Dead was he was it. He was, if you could sum up the black metal scene entirely, it is him.
Because the others were giving like, middle school Instagram handles, like edgy handles, but his name is just Dead.
Yes. So he was extremely eccentric. His beliefs were beyond pretty much anything that anyone else had at the time, and his behavior was very odd. So
interesting.
After being severely beaten as a child by bullies, he was actually clinically dead for a short period of time.
Like, and the kids beat him so bad that he died?
Yeah, like the kids beat him so bad that he actually experienced, I think it was liver failure, and died, but he was revived, like he came back. But this experience, it would affected him so profoundly that it would scar him for, well, basically ever. He became so fascinated by death to the point that after his experiences and him being brought back to life, for the rest of his life, he did not actually believe that he was alive. He thought that he was actually a literal walking corpse.
So therapy wasn't big in the 90s, or?
Well, especially not for him, and it wouldn't have mattered. This is specifically what happened. He believed that he was dead. This is something that would influence his behavior, his lyrics, his stage persona, everything that he did. And he was one of the first guys to prominently use something called corpse paint.
I know, but that's so sad though. Like, his life could have been significantly different if he didn't get beaten by bullies.
Yep, exactly. So for those of you who are curious, corpse paint, think of like, for anyone who has seen Kiss, like the band Kiss, where they have like that white paint with the black eye markings. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
This is a more extreme version of that because it's not that type of thing. Corpse paint is something typically used by black metal bands for concerts and band photos, which typically involves making the face and neck white or pale with like red marks on it to symbolize blood or lacerations in different areas, with the areas around the eyes and mouth being black to make you look like a corpse. But the whole point of it, like, it was made kind of pale rather than like ghostly white to actually make you look like a corpse, a demon, or some other kind of ethereal being. It wasn't just showy guys in spandex with painted white faces. They modeled themselves after literal corpses.
And he started that trend?
He made it even bigger. It was already kind of a thing. He adopted it and really publicized. Like, this became really big from him. So they all kind of started to wear corpse paint in the late 80s. But Dead didn't do it because he loved black metal. Dead did this because, similar to a person that may identify as something else, he identified as being dead.
Like an actual corpse.
Like an actual corpse. So he would do things to get as close to death as possible. He was even known before concerts to go and bury his clothes in the earth for like days or weeks at a time. And then before the concert, go and dig it back up and put them on so that he looked like a literal corpse that had crawled out of the ground.
I really, like, obviously he was going through something and needed some mental health assistance, but the dedication to the craft is commendable.
He was, but it wasn't just the things that he did with clothing. He did a lot of stuff that was way more insane. On stage, he would surround himself with dead animal heads. Like, you'd go onto stage and then in front of them on stakes, there would be the impaled heads of pigs, sheep, rats, cats, all different kinds of, like, whatever you can think of for an animal. If they got their hands on it, they would put its head on a stake, bleeding and everything right there. And that is something they did.
I'm not going to yuck anyone's yum, but that's just not.
Yep. On stage in front of people, he would slice himself open with glass or knives or other things just to bleed over. He would even, while bleeding from his own wrist, would then take his blood and start like throwing his wrist around to splash the audience with his blood.
And they were cool with that?
No. Well, at least most of them weren't. And it's a thing that we will get into in here for what it is that they would do. One of the other things is that before he would go on stage, at one point, he found a dead crow. So he stuffed it inside of a plastic bag where it would rot. And then before going onto stage would huff the bag to imbue himself with the sense of death so that he could get closer to it before performing.
So like I would say I don't know what to say here.
Yeah. I'm not making up any of the shit, by the way. This is all like in a published...
It'll be in the sources, guys. Like we'll list them on Patreon as we always do.
In a published interview that existed from the time, Dead explained how he and the rest of the band would expel the, quote, posers at their concerts, which, again, when you use the term poser when talking about in the scene, but it's like these guys were genuine. So they're not talking about posers on a level of like, oh, we're just going to call you a poser to insult you. No, at one particular event, when he talks about this in the interview, quote, before we began to play, there was a crowd of 300 in there. But in the second song, Necrolust, we began to throw around the pig heads, the things that were on the stakes. They started taking them off and chucking them at people in the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
By the end, only 50 people were left.
So they were happy about that?
They got rid of 250 out of the 300 people at their concert because they only wanted the people that weren't posers there. And yeah, he and the other members enjoyed the sort of practice, and he concluded with, quote, if someone doesn't like blood and rotten flesh being thrown in their face, they can fuck off, and that's exactly what they do.
Okay. But did he understand the concept of making money by not scaring your fans away?
Here's a thing. You know how a lot of people at this point are doing stuff specifically for fame and fortune?
They were just doing it for...
He is...
attention?
No, he is, by all accounts, a pure idealist, an ideologue of his own weird, twisted variety. He genuinely believes all of these things that about the core concepts of black metal and is not trying to sell anything to someone. He is just expressing himself.
So he just wanted in that to be as authentic to his belief of black metal as possible.
And what he was. Yes.
Okay, you know what? At least he was authentic, you know?
And remember, this is the lead singer of the band. He is front and center in everything. So with Dead as the lead singer, the band's concerts became notorious for extreme acts of self-mutilation, blood, satanic sacrifice, and more. The media hated them, as you can probably expect, but the black metal underground scene loved them. They were big.
Everybody shush! William Shatner has something to say.
Cat and Jethro, box of oddities.
What do you do when the woman you love dies? Well, of course you dig her up and you live with her.
Aww.
The show examines weird things.
There are plenty of old photographs from this time period of children out in the streets playing in and among the dead horse carcasses.
Oh, I miss those days. Things used to be so much simpler.
Cat and Jethro.
Then there's the urine wheel, which sounds like a really bad game show.
Thing done weird things. Cat and Jethro, box of oddities. That is really mysterious.
Join Cat and Jethro Gilligan Toth for the strange, the bizarre, the unexpected, as they lift the lid and cautiously peer inside the Box of Oddities.
The Webby Award-winning Box of Oddities podcast from Airwave Media.
Hello, this is Matt from the Explorers Podcast. I want to invite you to join me on the voyages and journeys of the most famous explorers in the history of the world. At the Explorers Podcast, we plunge into jungles and deserts, across mighty oceans and frigid ice caps, over and to the top of great mountains, and even into outer space. These are the thrilling and captivating stories of Magellan, Shackleton, Lewis and Clark, and so many other famous and not so famous adventurers from throughout history. So come give us a listen. We'd love to have you. Go to explorerspodcast.com or just look us up on your podcast app. That's the Explorers Podcast.
In 1990, the members of Mayhem would move to what could be described as an old house in the forest, which is
a cabin in the woods.
A cabin in the woods, basically, near Oslo, Norway, which is the capital of it. This would be an isolated place where they would be able to use it as a rehearsal space for the group. And from there, they would begin writing songs for their album, De Mysteriis Dom Satanas. And they would, at this point, in an isolated cabin in the woods, so to speak, be around each other almost all the time.
I couldn't even be around you almost all the time in a cabin in the woods.
Yeah, it's actually a good point that you say that to me right now, because as one who is listening to this can probably imagine and understand, after having lived with siblings, roommates, housemates, some form of cohabitation in one form or another, a group of guys or girls or whatever being around each other constantly is inevitably going to lead to some sort of friction developing, right? Something is going to happen. And depending upon the person, this could blow up to become big, or it could subside quickly. Depends upon the person. But when your whole mantra is based upon death, violence, and hating everything around you, that is something that would likely lead to an increased level of confrontation.
So when they said they hated everything around them, they also hated each other?
Look,
but like if the people had the same beliefs and they all wanted the same things to spread hatred and anger, wouldn't they get along? Like
you would think.
They could be hateful together.
So here's the problem with this. And this shows the level of how broken their personalities were and outlook on life. Yes, they could get along with each other, but you know how some people can be described as like a volcano that over time things don't bother them, but then they eventually may reach a point where they explode?
You described me as that.
Mm-hmm. Imagine their level of the cavernous of the volcano is the size of a thimble, that they're just ready to, they'll be friendly, they could be, but then they could just blow up on anything.
So they just were a little bit erratic with the behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm not kidding when I talk about that whole thing of hating everyone and everything either. In interviews, Euronymous, one of the band members, he claimed to be against, and I quote, this is a direct quote from him, individualism, compassion, peace, happiness, and fun.
Okay, question about the individualism, because they're being very much individuals.
So
with their whole thing that they have
there
going
are
there.
later quotes. You know how when we talk about Satanism, and this is a thing, we should actually probably dedicate an episode specifically about Satanism, that the concept for anyone who is listening of a religious background, the majority of Satanists do not actually worship the devil. They don't worship Satan from Christian beliefs. Satanism is oftentimes used as a juxtaposition to Christianity and the limitations within it of extreme free will, of being able to do what you want without being beholden to by church or church rules. And that's pretty much it. Literally do what it is that you want. It's more freedom, which I don't like how that's phrased in here, but per the beliefs, that's specifically what it is, that it's not being held back by any of these religious ideologies. It's almost a type of atheism rather than any kind of deism. In fact, there is a point in interviews where I think it was Euronymous specifically is talking about the Satanists and how he despises them because they are nothing more than freedom-loving atheists. And that's not what he wants. He wants to control and dominate people, that they will be forced to obey.
So God complex? Question mark?
Yeah, pretty much. And you're going to be seeing that as time goes on. It's actually a good point. Again, I'm glad that you're picking up on these little details because, yes, the band members, as time would go on, would basically say that he developed a God complex as time went on. And this is something that would be his undoing.
It's like I make jokes about wanting to be the ruler of the world, but you can't like actually do it.
Yeah. He didn't just want to rule the world. He said that his goal was to, quote, spread hatred, sorrow, and evil.
He'd be like the worst dictator ever. Not that there's, great ones, but.
Yeah. Which, okay. I wonder how this could possibly then lead to conflict and general misery within a group. Seems pretty sound of mind, right? There's no way someone like that could be unstable or anything.
That guy as our roommate would actually be my 13th reason.
Exactly. This guy was absolutely insane.
That's not even like is he just in the cabin making everyone sad all the time? Oh, you're smiling. Fuck you.
Sort of. We're going to talk about this later, but this guy would send death threats at the drop of a hat. Like that is a thing that he would just do. In a 1992 interview, he said, and I quote, the hardcore punk pigs have correctly made themselves guardians of morality, but we must kick them in the face and become guardians of anti-morality. The following year, he told Kill Yourself Zine, quote, "There is nothing which is too sick, evil, or perverted," and claimed, "I have no problem with killing someone in cold blood."
Like, he said all of this in interviews, like media.
In interviews, like direct interviews. Yeah.
And he was just like, this is okay.
So this is a thing that is kind of contentious, where some people would claim that he was putting on just an act and others would say it was real. It's when you see what happens with a lot of the band and how they react to things. No, I do believe that even if some of it was an act, that he made it real with time. Like
if you commit to something too long, you start to believe it.
Yeah. So even if he didn't believe it in the beginning, which I don't know, he probably did believe that by the end. This level of extreme belief is something that would stick with him as time went on, and it helped to create many, many, many conflicts within the band. So Mayhem bassist Necrobutcher would later note that after living together for a time, quote, "Dead and Euronymous got on each other's nerves a lot and weren't really friends at the end."
Why did they decide to live together? That just sounded like a terrible idea because they had such strong personalities. Yeah. Both of them had very, very strong personalities.
But they needed to for work here.
You work with a lot of people. You don't move into a cabin with them.
I know. So as an example of this, with their mutual antagonism of each other, Hellhammer would recall an incident where Dead once went outside to sleep in the woods because Euronymous was playing synthesizer music that Dead really hated, and he was doing it specifically on purpose to bother him, it seems. So Euronymous followed him outside and shot into the air with a shotgun to intimidate him. In another incident, Varg Vikernes, who is another guy in this, who's going to come up later, he alleges that Dead once stabbed Euronymous with a knife.
Well, given that Euronymous shot shotguns into the air, maybe Dead was like self-defense?
Okay. You see, again, it's a good thing that you're bringing up this stuff now here, because again, there's going to be a lot of, I don't want to spoil things here. I really don't want to spoil things. Okay. Needless to say, there's bad blood between these two, and soon there wasn't just going to be corpse paint. There was going to be an actual real corpse. See, in time, Dead's fixation with death and his life caused his mental state to drastically worsen. He would just casually begin to cut himself while in the presence of friends. Like, imagine this, that you're all at a party. You're all like drinking, laughing, having a good time. You're watching something. And he would, like, in the middle of like drinking or having a conversation with someone, just pull out a knife or a piece of glass and just start cutting himself. Like, literally in a room with people. And that is something to do. And they experienced this so many times that they even had a standard protocol for what to do, which was to handcuff him and put him in a corner.
Reasonable. At least they had a protocol.
And then continued to party.
They were good friends, though, because they stopped him and helped him, I'm sure.
Yeah. So obviously they would have to treat his wounds, make sure they didn't get infected. If it got bad enough, drop him off at a police station or a hospital. They would do that. That was a thing that happened. And although this upset many of his friends who didn't want him to do this, Euronymous was a little bit different.
I wouldn't call Euronymous his friend. I would not call Euronymous his friend.
See, Euronymous became fascinated by Dead and his suicidal tendencies because he felt that the extreme negativity, depression, murderous rage of Dead, that fit Mayhem's image perfectly. That is what the brand meant. That was what he wanted. And so along with this, according to other members of the band, he actually encouraged Dead to kill himself.
I told you that was not his friend.
And eventually, this is exactly what happened.
Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara's podcast from beneath the Hollywood sign.
Mary Astor has been keeping a diary.
Mary writes everything down.
And so this torrid affair with George S. Kaufman is chronicled on a daily basis.
In great detail. And Ike pulls out a box and gives McAllister a ring saying, here's something to remember me by. This article caused Daryl Zanuck to hit the roof.
Actress Ruth Roman followed that up with playing a foil to Bette Davis in Beyond the Forest. I mean, if you can stand toe-to-toe with her, boy.
And she does, because she plays the daughter of the man that Bette Davis kills out on the hunting trip.
And it's directed by King Vidor, so he's no slouch.
How do you go wrong with that?
Yeah.
Speaking of the Oscars, talking about what I call beginner's luck, it's all about the actors and actresses who won an Oscar on their very first film.
Get your fix of old Hollywood from Steve and Ann on the podcast From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
What do you get when you take two childhood friends with a passion for unexplored history and a whole lot of booze?
You get the goofiest game in history, Queen's Podcast.
Hi, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Katie, and we're the host of Queen's Podcast.
Join us while we spill the tea on women from history.
We get into all kinds of stories here, like biographies of lesser-known figures. For instance, Saida Al-Hura, powerful pirate queen.
To the stories you might already know, like Marie Antoinette or Cleopatra, but with a fun twist.
Each queen is paired with a cocktail that'll totally get you in the mood to hear fun, juicy, and dramatic stories from history.
Because history is so much more than just dudes on a battlefield, and we believe that the female perspective and roles are just as deserving of their time in the spotlight.
Right. So come get to know these queens. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Cheers.
On the 8th of April, 1991, when left alone in the house, Dead would proceed to use a hunting knife to slit his wrists and throat, and then afterwards, shoot himself in the forehead with a shotgun. He left a brief suicide note that explained his actions and helps you to understand that he didn't view himself as being alive. The note reads, and I quote, "Excuse the blood, but I have slit my wrists and neck. It was the intention that I would die in the woods so that it would take a few days before I was possibly found. I belong in the woods and have always done so. No one will understand the reason for this anyway. To give some semblance of an explanation, I'm not human. This is just a dream, and soon I will wake. It was too cold and the blood kept clotting. Plus, the new knife is too dull. If I don't succeed dying to the knife, I will blow all the shit out of my skull. Yet I do not know. I left all my lyrics by Let the Good Times Roll, plus the rest of the money. Whoever finds it gets the fucking thing. As a last salutation, may I present Life Eternal. Do whatever you want with it. I didn't come up with this now, but 17 years ago." He was 22 years old.
He was only 22?
Yeah. So this is where the story gets really fucked up with this. And that's saying something, considering that we just talked about the suicide. His body gets found. Do you know who finds his body?
Euronymous.
Now, Euronymous, to get into the house, he had to climb through an open window because the doors were locked and there were no other keys to get inside. And at this point, I would like to ask you, Gabby, what would you do in this situation? What would be your first reaction after finding your longtime friend and coworker dead in a bloody mess after taking his own life?
I would never be in that situation because I wouldn't go in the house because it'd be locked. So I'd call somebody else, like anybody else, to do it.
Okay, but let's say that you came across them. Let's say that they didn't lock the door and you just
call
walked
the cops.
in. Okay, you'd call the cops.
You mean 911? Can you call 911? Because 911 is for emergencies, but they're already dead. But if you call the cops, then I don't even know who you'd call. I'd call 911, I guess, and then be like, but if you call 911 and you're not supposed to, can't you get into trouble?
Yeah, but no, like, you are right. That is the correct action that you are supposed to take, that you are supposed to call the cops. Many people, maybe their first reaction would be to cry, to scream, to express grief, to call the cops, to panic, to do all these different things. Not Euronymous. Instead of calling the police immediately, he went to a nearby shop to buy a disposable camera and began taking pictures of the body. This being after he rearranged a number of items in the room and the corpse so that he could get better pictures. And then only afterwards did he call emergency services.
See, I knew about that, but wow.
Now, why would he do this? You may wonder.
The edginess of an authentic, gory album cover that isn't special effects.
Literally, yeah. Yeah, for anyone who is curious about this, he did the whole fucking thing because he thought it would make a totally awesome album cover. I am not kidding. One of those photos was actually used as the front cover of the 1995 bootleg live LP, The Dawn of the Black Hearts, that they ended up putting out. That was a real thing. Necrobutcher would later recount Euronymous informing him about the suicide, saying, and I quote, Oyston, this being Euronymous, which I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of a number of the names in the first place, called me up the next day and says, Dead has done something really cool. He killed himself. I thought, have you lost it? What do you mean cool? He said, relax. I have photos of everything. I was in shock and grief. He was just thinking how to exploit it. So I told him, okay, don't even fucking call me before you destroy those pictures.
There is no way he was being for real. Like, that can't be real.
Remember when I said that it seems that over time he bought into the image, he bought into everything if he didn't already believe it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just it. Euronymous did not delete any of those, or delete. He didn't get rid of them because this was a disposable camera. He didn't do that. Instead, he utilized Dead's suicide in order to cultivate Mayhem's evil image and pure black metal image, claiming that Dead had taken his life because black metal was being commercialized. It wasn't raw. It wasn't real enough. In time, he even went and fashioned necklaces using the bits of skull from Dead, because he shotgun blasted his own head, sending pieces of skull fragments everywhere. So he had collected all those and would proceed to turn them into necklaces to send to people that he deemed to be worthy.
How did the cops allow that? I guess they don't.
I don't know.
Well, actually, I did see something that after they conclude their investigation, if it's nothing that is a criminal activity, you actually have to deal with cleanup and stuff yourself. And I saw this on Twitter because a girl was like really upset because the coroner and everyone were like, oh yeah, you probably just need to call like a cleanup person. And they were mad about it. But yeah, I guess Euronymous was the cleanup person.
Yeah, so he did that, and he would give these necklaces to people that apparently he deemed to be worthy, like musicians that were real representatives of what black metal was. And as far as he was concerned, that meant people that were just like him. We're going to get into this for what I mean. Euronymous that year, literally within a month or two after this event in 1991, he goes and opens a record shop called Helvet, meaning hell. Exactly. And for people that are fans or ardent supporters or disciples of black metal, that store was everything that black metal was. That became the focal point for the entire scene in Norway. The hype here was absolutely enormous, but Euronymous was also becoming a victim of his own hype. He was making himself the focal point, not just of Mayhem, but of the movement of black metal itself.
Is that bad?
Yes. Per Dolk, who is the lead singer of the black metal band Kampfer, quote, he became too high on himself, like, I'm the leader. He thought he could control the whole Norwegian metal scene. I know for a fact that there were a lot of people talking about getting Oyston out of the scene, and by that, I mean getting rid of him. As in killing him? Yeah.
Okay, so because he became so controlling, people were done with him, essentially. Because here's the thing. If you make yourself the leader of people who want to spread death and sorrow, what's stopping them from spreading it to you?
Exactly. And you're going to see how this gets really contentious as time goes on, because the band really does start to splinter here.
But the thing is, what I'm getting from this is like Death was troubled and Euronymous is just unhinged. And the other members were just there for the ride, I guess.
They also had beliefs, but they had different beliefs. Like, here's the thing.
They seemed like they had more of a conscience.
Kind of, yes. But some of them had different beliefs as well. Like, we're going to get into this. Hellhammer has, even though I think he denies this, there's a lot of associations with him with neo-Nazi beliefs and everything. Like, he used a lot of Nazi imagery and like anti-race mixing stuff. Like, there's
of course.
Again,
Why is it every cult or movement that we cover, like the unhinged ones, always have some sort of like racist roots?
Because a lot of them have to do with purity. There's an idea of purifying yourself, and in these kinds of places, they can associate mixed race or whatever for anything is like, oh well, that's obviously not pure because you're mixing.
That's wild.
Yeah. So completely disturbed and broken by the death of his friend and bandmate, bassist and co-founder Necrobutcher would actually leave the band. So he was out of that, which meant that in the end, you had just two people, Hellhammer and Euronymous, the latter of whom was actually just wearing the necklaces that he had out of the dead skull.
Oh my God.
He just wore that around on a regular basis. In 1992 then, so within the year, the two would then go on to recruit more musicians to support them. You had Burzum's Varg Vikernes on bass, Thorn's Snorruk on guitar, and Tormentor's Attila Ksar on vocals. And from there, they began to make music and write songs and create more things to debut their full-length new album. And one could argue at this point that things were looking to get back on track, but within a year of this, Euronymous had to close his record shop due to increasing media and police presence that were brought about by Dead Suicide, along with a string of high-profile church burnings and other associated acts of violence that, for whatever reason, seemed to really all have one thing in common: the black metal scene, and specifically his record shop, which was the focal point of it. I wonder. Yeah, if you thought things were going to get easier and nicer at this point, no, they did not. Things get darker really fast.
Wait, so the church burnings were Euronymous?
Okay, here, this is what's going to require some explanation for this. No, it's okay. I totally get the confusion, because it appears to be, yes, Euronymous did some of these things, but so did a bunch of other people. Because once people started doing this in the black metal scene, other people started copycatting. And this became a thing that would just happen.
Just for funsies?
Pretty much.
Because they weren't changing anything. They were just doing random acts of violence.
Yeah. So on the 6th of June, 1992, Fantoft Stave Church in Bergen was burned down to the ground. Vikernes was suspected of doing it, but he was found not guilty in court and would later explain that about the whole thing with Fantoft, that this was a Christian church that was built on top of a pagan holy site. And that is something that was used as justification by black metal activists, you could say, to justify more acts of violence. After Fantoft, even more churches would follow. As I said from the beginning, by 1996, there were at least 50 attacks in Norway, and in every case that was actually solved, because remember, a number of these were not solved.
Yeah.
But in every case that was, those responsible were identified as being black metal fans. Every one. It sounds ridiculous. It literally sounds like, oh, the media is just making something up to get a scapegoat and blame a specific group. Like, it almost sounds like what was happening in America with people blaming shootings on like people playing violent video games.
Yeah.
But this was real. This wasn't something where people are like playing something in a game or listening something to music and then like they're actually getting inspired and then wanting to do these things.
This is insane.
Yes. It is literally a terrorist movement that is arising within this metal subgenre. It really does sound ridiculous, but black metal singers and fans would one-up and copy each other in acts of violence to destroy Christianity in Norway as they saw it. And the first of that, the Fantoft Stave churches, authorities do believe that it was Varg Vikernes, and one of the reasons they believe this is because on the cover of Burzum's EP, Aska, which means ashes, this has a photograph of the destroyed church. And at different points, they literally pictured themselves in front of the churches as they are burning.
It's just not what you do, guys. If you commit an illegal act, don't document it for it's like the lady stealing from Target on TikTok the other day. Where she was literally stealing and posting every single thing from her hauls to her TikToks, and the police solved the case by doing that.
It's so stupid. It is so stupid. Now you understand why when I'm talking about this, I'm not speaking about it's a very serious subject, but I'm just baffled by the sheer level of horror and stupidity of the entire thing. Now, at this point, if we then go and skip by a bit of time, which is actually past the thing that I was trying to talk about from the very get-go with the whole murder, I have to mention this because it's still with the whole churches thing. On the 16th of May, 1994, Vikernes was found guilty of burning down several other churches, the Holmenkollen Chapel, the Skuld Church, and the Asane Church. Additionally, he was convicted of an attempted arson of a fourth church and for theft and storage of 150 kilograms of explosives.
Now, why did he have explosives? So for the churches?
For the churches,
Dear
it
God.
seems. This guy was prolific, but it was not only him and the Norwegians. Members of the Swedish black metal scene also began to burn churches down in the 1990s as well. Like literally across Scandinavia, there was just church burnings. This was a big thing that was happening there.
I've never heard of this. Like, this is Wow.
Yeah. So remember in America at this time, there's all these things of like the new age out of the 80s and 90s of like, oh, the Satanists are trying to take over America. Remember that whole thing with a lot of the scares?
I'm not American. I have no clue. Baby.
Okay. Well, for anyone listening, that was a thing. There was a whole thing to try to stop Satanism, and video games and violent music was associated with this. That did not apply to America. That sure as hell did apply to Norway and Sweden.
Wow.
That was real. So the musicians Faust and Samuth, which were both from another black metal band called Emperor, as well as Jorn Inge Tunsberg of Hades Almighty, they were also convicted of church arsons.
So like all the black metal bands.
A bunch of different metal bands were found guilty of doing this, of burning down churches. Those convicted of church burnings also did not give a shit. They were never like upset that they got caught or anything. They described their actions as symbolic retaliation against Christianity in Norway. And others would also carry more white nationalist anti-foreign sentiments. Like as an example, the Mayhem drummer Hellhammer that I was talking about before, he didn't want to attack the Christian churches so much. He wanted to attack the mosques and the Hindu temples because they were more foreign.
Wow.
Yeah. So it is crazy when you go back and look at these events, because even to this day, those events are actually, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, controversial within the black metal community.
Like some people agree with it and some people don't.
Yeah.
So some people agree with it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now you see, when I talk about this, like, I don't want to demonize the genre. This is something that genuinely just baffles me for the sheer level of stupidity in it.
Yeah, you're right. Wow.
Many musicians, singers, and songwriters from the early black metal scene, such as Gal of Golgoroth, even would continue to praise the church burnings, stating, and I quote, "There should have been more of them, and there will be more of them."
They really have just. But what were they accomplishing other than getting arrested?
Literally nothing. They accomplished nothing. The entire purpose was to spread destruction, misery, mayhem, all of this. That was the whole point. Like, this group is wild, but there is a lot more than just anti-Christian sentiment. There was also anti-homosexual, there was white nationalist Nazi views. All of this became more common in the scene as well.
So they were just horrible people.
A lot of them were. Now, and that's not everyone. That is not. And I don't want to say that that is the case.
No, just the people doing the act.
There were a lot of prominent bands that specifically have a lot of these problems.
Yeah, the people actually doing the acts, obviously, or like, the horrible people and the people holding those beliefs. But, I'm sure some people were just like, oh, haha, this is edgy.
Exactly. And so, as I said, a lot more than this happened. It wasn't just the church burnings. Like, in another example, there was an anti-gay murder, like a hate crime. On the 21st of August, 1992, the musician Bard Faust Ethan would go and murder Magna Andreasen, who was a gay man, in Lillehammer. And according to Faust, while he was just walking home at night, there was a man who made sexual advances towards him. And Faust, I guess in order to trick him, agreed to walk with him to the Olympic Park, because in the 80s and 90s, there was a thing that was associated with gay people hooking up in parks and this kind of thing. But once they got to the woods, Faust proceeded to stab Anderson 37 times.
Did he get he went to prison for forever, right?
Not immediately, no. He got away with it for a while.
How?
Because no one knew what happened. Faust claimed later on that he felt no remorse at the time. And in the late 1990s, he would even reflect on the murder, stating, quote, "I was outside, just waiting to get out some aggression. It's not easy to describe why it happened. It was meant to happen. And if it was this man or another man, that's not really important."
So he was just, he just wanted to do something.
Yeah, he wasn't anti-gay. He just wanted to murder someone.
And is he in prison forever?
Well, no, he went to prison. That's the thing. A lot of these guys ended up going to prison. They're free now.
But how do you get free after doing something like that?
Because Norway, and we're going to cover this later, they have a maximum sentence of 21 years. That is the maximum sentence. So you could
literally do anything and only go to prison for 21 years?
Pretty much, yes.
I am speechless.
Yeah. There is.
I love that they're trying to be humane.
People can make an argument.
Some people do some things that are so inhumane, People
can make an argument, and this is a thing that is oftentimes said, and I do agree with this, that the purpose of prisons in a lot of the Scandinavian countries are not to just punish. They're specifically to reform and rehabilitation.
Did they get rehabilitated?
Some, I would argue, yes. Others, even if they no longer have the violent tendencies, still have the same beliefs. And
But they're safer?
They're safer, I guess. So by that logic, I mean, they didn't commit any more murders, it seems, after all of that.
This episode is making my head hurt.
I told you from the very get-go that this one was going to be bad.
It's like a lot of moral conundrums.
Yeah.
And
so, yeah, initially the police had no suspects and Foster would remain free for approximately a year. However, he confided in Euronymous, Vikernes, and a few others about his crime. So he did tell people, and this is actually that would end up coming back to bite him because since it was a random killing, there was literally nothing that would link it back to him. Like nothing. Because almost all murders and things that happen are by people who know someone, whether they were actually knowing them or had stalked them for a while. It's not just a random killing on the street, like as a passerby.
That's why sometimes it's so hard to find serial killers because they're typically just random people that have no, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. So the day following the stabbing, he would return back to Oslo and allegedly, literally the next day, would go down and burn the Holmenkollen chapel with Vikernes. So he murders a gay guy and then the next day goes and burns down a church.
This man is a piece of work and he's free.
Yeah.
Just walking around now.
Yeah. Well, actually, hold on.
That's just hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's still alive in here. I don't remember if I did from the very end when I was researching the people and what happened to them afterwards, if I checked him out. But I know that he survived for a lot of that. And yeah, all of this would take place before the big murder. And this is the thing that I was actually trying to build up to the entire time. This is the thing that would bring down Mayhem as a band. So remember how I talked about earlier to coincide with their album's release that Euronymous and Vikernes had conspired to blow up a cathedral, like they wanted to blow up a fourth church?
Yeah.
That is the thing that would be featured on their album cover, and that's what they wanted. Like they wanted to blow up the church in order to put that on an album cover. That is what they wanted to do. However, this didn't happen because Euronymous' murder in August of 1993 would end up stopping the plan.
So Euronymous got murdered.
Euronymous got murdered.
Okay, because the way Euronymous was, you'd think he was the one doing the murder.
Exactly. So on the night of the 10th of August, 1993, Vikernes stabbed Euronymous to death at his apartment in Oslo. As for why the murder took place, we aren't really entirely sure. There's a lot of speculation as to what the real reason for the murder was, whether it was a power struggle in the band or Euronymous owing Vikernes a large amount of money like royalty payments, or, as Vikernes would claim, if it actually was self-defense. Vikernes, for his part, does claim that he killed Euronymous in self-defense, saying that Euronymous had plotted to stun him with an electric weapon, whether that is like a stun gun or something to disable him, to then tie him up and torture him to death while videotaping the event. That sounds wild, but get this, threats of him doing that were actually common. And by that, I mean Euronymous would literally just send death threats to people when they pissed him off. That was a normal thing that he did. As Necrobutcher would later explain in a 2018 interview, quote, Oyston was always sending death threats to people. It was his reaction to everything, but he didn't put so much into it. And then when he met you, he was like, okay, you're cool. And then, you're best friends afterwards. So when eventually he got to be unfriendly with Varg, he threatened him like he did everyone else. Oyston told him, quote, I'm going to send some people to torture you until you die. But Varg Vikernes saw this as a real threat. He probably thought, well, better him than me. I'll just go down and do him.
Wow.
Yeah. So on the matter of the murder, as Vikernes explains, if he was talking about it to everybody and anybody, I wouldn't have taken it seriously, but he apparently only told a select group of friends, and one of them told me. So in order to make sure that he did not get murdered, he said that Euronymous planned to use a meeting about an unsigned contract to ambush him, and he was going to ambush him first. Yeah.
This is just so convoluted.
You see how freaking messy this thing is and why this has taken so long to prepare. So on the night of the murder, Vikernes and Snorre Blackthorn Rook would drive to Euronymous' apartment. Blackthorn would allegedly stand in the stairwell smoking while Vikernes went up to the apartment itself. And while there, Vikernes said that he met Euronymous at the door to hand him a signed contract. But when he stepped forward and confronted Euronymous, Euronymous panicked and then kicked him in the chest. As for what happened next, According to Vikernes claims that Euronymous ran into the kitchen to fetch a knife, which would then turn into a struggle, and after this struggle, Vikernes would have stabbed Euronymous to death. His body was found on the stairwell on the first floor with 23 stab wounds, 2 to the head, 5 to the neck, and 16 to the back.
Self-defense?
Self-defense.
That's a lot of self-defense.
That's a lot of self-defense.
Like, I feel like he defended himself pretty well with like just the first maybe 2. One warning stab might have done the message.
Yeah,
you know?
Which I say on that note, 23 seems a little bit excessive, especially when you consider the location of the wounds. Remember, 16 in the back. I could understand if...
I just don't understand. So like head, neck, back.
Yes. Yeah.
That's wait, head, neck, maybe you could do head and neck first, and then they turn, and then you do back. If it's self-defense, wouldn't it be frontward stabs?
You would think, wouldn't you? And that's the face. So you could make the argument, stabbed in the face, neck, and you're like trying to get them away, so they turn away to shield themselves. And as you do that, you stab them in the back.
You shouldn't. If they turn away, why would you keep going?
Why would there be 16? You could say 1, 2, 3, maybe.
I don't know. I've never
why
defended.
16?
I don't. This is a bit much.
Yep. So this claim of self-defense is doubted by a number of people, as you can imagine, including Emperor Drummer Faust. But Mayhem bassist Necrobutcher actually does believe that Vikernes did kill Euronymous due to the death threats that we mentioned here before. So he still does believe that it was self-defense, even if it was, God, what would the Japanese Special Defense Force call this? Preemptive self-defense.
Preemptive self-defense.
Exactly. So after the murder, Vikernes and Blackthorn would then drive away and stop at a lake where Vikernes would dispose of his blood-stained clothes, but that didn't help him escape. Within literally a few days, like this happened on, what was it, the 10th or the 13th here? Within the week, basically, he was captured. He was arrested on the 19th of August, 1993 in Bergen. The police would find 150 kilograms of explosives as well as 3,000 rounds of ammunition in his home.
What was he planning on? Was that for his original plan with Euronymous?
Okay, maybe. We don't know. We don't know. As for what he was going to do with all of it, we literally don't know. It could have been used to attack another church, or according to a book called The Encyclopedia of White Power, which looks at a lot of different extremist groups, Vikernes intended to blow up something called the Blitz House, which was a radical leftist anarchist enclave in Oslo. So like basically anarcho-communists, those kinds of people, that this was something that they were planning to launch. They were planning to do. So he was going to do this attack. But that when all of this was being planned, that because of a difference in ideology, Euronymous was in Vikernes' mind a communist, so he could have tipped them off, which would have failed or foiled the plan, which in turn meant that he had to silence him first.
This is so convoluted.
We don't know.
Also, I would not expect it to be, okay, Vikernes, the one that, because you would expect.
Oh, trust me, we haven't even gotten to this guy's beliefs as time goes on for a lot of things. Vikernes would deny these claims in 2009 in an interview, saying that he was just collecting the explosives and ammunition in order to, quote, defend Norway if we are attacked anytime. So,
What a patriot.
Yeah. Anyway, his trial began on the 2nd of May, 1994, and many other members within the black metal scene, including Blackthorn and Faust, were also put on trial at that same time for, Faust going and killing the gay guy before that. Well, now because everyone is on trial and things are getting revealed, guess what? He told other members of the scene what he did. So they didn't reveal anything before, but once they're captured by police, yeah, they're going to start talking. That happened. According to Lords of Chaos, which was something that went and documented this whole scene, Vikernes was disgusted by the fact that he stayed silent during the whole thing, but other people confessed that they weren't true supporters. They weren't true members of the black metal scene because they weren't diehard enough. On the 16th of May, 1994, Vikernes would be sentenced to 21 years in prison, which is Norway's maximum penalty, for the murder of Euronymous, the arson of 3 churches, the attempted arson of the 4th church, and for theft and storage of 150 kilograms of explosives. Though Vikernes only confessed to the theft and storage of the explosives, 2 churches were set on fire the day that he was sentenced, which this was still happening at the time, which appears it may have, we don't know, this may have been in retaliation or a show of support from the black metal scene for him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because people are still supporting
him.
All right.
And that's, again, that remember how I said this is still controversial somehow to this day.
I have so many.
Yeah. Blackthorn, who hadn't taken part in the murder because he was still seen as an accomplice, or what is the term? Accomplice. That's the thing. Even if he didn't participate, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison.
You know, this is like really shocking because I don't know about black metal fans, but I know a lot of metalheads and they're like the nicest people. Typically, like when you're at a metal concert, I do not look like somebody who belongs at a metal concert when I go to a metal concert, and they're always so nice.
I'm telling you, that's power metal. Power metal fans are really awesome people. Even death metal fans are typically they're more chill.
Like I know a lot of metalheads, and they're just they're vibing.
Yeah.
They probably like have really strong necks from all the headbanging, but like they're vibing.
But you get what it is that I mean here now.
This is just now I'm gonna have trust issues. I'm gonna be like, what type of metal? Name the bands. Okay, what do you feel about Mayhem?
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to interrogate everyone now.
Exactly. And so at this point now, once again, they were reduced down to 2 members. It was only Attila and Hellhammer, which meant that Mayhem as a band effectively ceased to exist. It was gone. And that should have been the end.
What do you mean that should have been the end?
Because it wasn't. Even with the people being arrested, even with all this going down, the band technically still existed. And remember the album that they'd been working on for years?
Yeah.
That got released while they were in prison. 7 years in the making, De Mysteriis Dom Satanas, which featured Euronymous on the guitar, even though he was dead, and lyrics that were, from Dead, which I'm not saying Dead, like we're going back before where it's like Dead the guy. That all comes out because it was, his stuff, like all these things, this project that he'd been working on for 7 years. This comes out in 1994 and becomes one of the most influential black metal albums of all time. Because just the sheer amount of controversy and everything surrounding them, they become so famous from this. The concert LP Live, which was in Leipzig, this was recorded back in 1990 and had arrived the year prior. And the initial release of it actually ended up getting delayed. And I say this as it's a funny thing, but it's not funny, haha. It's more funny, haha, oh, this is really uncomfortable. The whole thing ended up getting delayed because Euronymous' parents wanted to basically sue, or they put in a request that all of the parts with Vikernes in it, Vikernes, that they remove it and instead have the whole thing re-recorded with a new guy playing bass because they don't want the murderer to be on the album with their son.
But it was his band member. I mean, yeah, it was his murderer, but it was his band member. They did the album.
Yeah. And Hellhammer.
It wouldn't be authentic.
I know. That's the whole thing. That's the authenticity. So Hellhammer, who is in charge at this point.
What would Euronymous want? He wanted to be authentic, I fear.
It's true. Yeah. No, that's the thing. Euronymous probably would have wanted that.
Which brings me back. So these people had parents. Which, yeah, duh. But like these people had parents.
Yes.
How on earth did Euronymous get Dead's skull if Dead had parents?
I didn't look into a lot of their stuff. The only one whose background I know from like childhood is specifically Dead. And that was the whole thing with the bullies. I don't know about the whole thing with his parents or what their situation was. I didn't look into that. And even then the information that I was finding didn't provide much. So I couldn't really see that. But yeah, the parents of Euronymous wanted Vikernes' bass parts to be removed. And then they wanted those to be re-recorded by someone else. And Hellhammer went, no, we're still keeping it. Later that year, Necrobutcher and Maniac, the guys who quit before after the death of Dead, ended up rejoining Mayhem, as did a new guitarist called Blasphemer. And the group then launched the Wolf's Lair Abyss EP in 1997. This would lead to a whole new era of controversy. I can't believe I'm saying it like that, but
I just can't believe there's more controversy. Like, please, everybody is basically dead.
Yeah, but remember that whole thing that I said about Hellhammer and his interesting stances on things?
Yeah.
Well, because he's now like the guy who's been calling a lot of the shots within the band, a lot more of his stances and views on things are coming out, which is his stances on being against race mixing and foreigners in Norway. He would oftentimes use Nazi imagery like swastika flags in the rehearsal room. And the Totenkampf, which is the death's head hat. He also had a whole bunch of things for like the military or the right-wing paramilitary fascist movement in Norway from the
Was it
1930s.
Euronymous? Like, I'm so confused. The other members, I feel like they would not. I don't know.
I don't even know how to describe it.
Well, maybe they would have. I don't know.
That's exactly. So that's what
you
he did.
You just don't know what they wanted.
Fun.
They were all just so anti everything good.
Exactly. Literally, yes.
So they might have been very pro this because it was pro bad.
I know. So time goes on. In the year 2000, Mayhem goes and releases their next album, The Grand Declaration of War, which actually moved away from black metal. They went and took on a more progressive avant-garde metal approach, with them trading in, the rasping and screaming to something that was closer to spoken word, which that really confused a lot of their fans, and they were heavily criticized. Like the 2000 for that is seen as basically the death of the band in terms of where they abandoned their old ways and became something different. But then they came back in 2004 with the album Chimera, because that's when they went really hard back into black metal with another debut, which was slightly more polished, I guess, than what they'd previously done.
I feel like I've heard some from.
You might have. Oh my God. You might have actually listened to some of this.
Listen to Chimera.
Oh my God. That would end up being the last thing for Maniac, who left the group at this time amidst a lot of turmoil in the band. Because remember, they all have fucking issues. According to Necrobutcher, the reason that Maniac left was due to him being an alcoholic. With this being something that was exacerbated as time went on by stage fright, like he literally would panic and could not perform. So Necrobutcher explained that due to this tendency, there was a violent altercation between the singer and Blasphemer that led to the guitarist kicking Maniac down a flight of stairs.
Dear.
After which he left the band.
Okay. I'm just trying to learn bands are deadly.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the black metal ones here that are constantly fighting each other and hate each other, it seems. And so Cesar, I don't know how the hell I actually pronounce the name in here. He was then reinstated as the replacement. This is the Attila guy. So Attila was reinstated for vocals for 2007 and their acclaimed album, Ordo Askeo, which received, this was like a high mark for them, the Spellemannprisen or Spellemannprisen. This is the Norwegian equivalent to a Grammy Award. It was really big. Like this band, they rose from all the chaos that they had to get an award for the best heavy metal album of 2008.
Wow.
Blasphemer was then the next to depart. And then after this happened, there would be a rotating list of different guitarists that would take over after that. And then 2014 would see the release of the album Esoteric Warfare. 2018 would see the release of Jonas Åkerlund Bathory, the directed feature film Lords of Chaos, which that is a documentary that basically was based off a book from 1998 that covered a lot of the early birth and scene of the Norwegian black metal scene. And it paid particular attention to the bloody history of Mayhem. So it told the story. That's actually where a lot of this information comes from, is specifically from the Lord of Chaos. Then Demon, the group's sixth album, followed in 2019. An EP called Atavistic Black Disorder Commando would arrive in 2021 with additional material from the Demon sessions. And in 2023, Mayhem issued Demonic Rites, a concert LP that chronicled the band's last 2 years of touring. They're still going.
I'm mind blown.
They're not gone, Gabby. They are still around. That is pretty much it. Even with all the murder, the suicide, the possible neo-Nazi past, they're still around. And it all comes together to create easily one of the most chaotic backgrounds I have ever seen, and is something that would go on to define a genre and to this day creates controversy. But that is the end of the murderous story. As for what actually happened with Vikernes, because I'm sure you're actually wondering with him, because he went to prison, he continued with Burzum, the band that he had before, after his release from prison. He released a further 3 black metal albums called Bellis in 2010, Fallen in 2011, and Umskiptar in 2012, along with a compilation of re-recorded songs from the depths of darkness. And on April 27th of 2013, he would post a song on his official YouTube channel called Back to the Shadows, which he stated was going to be the last metal track to be released by Burzum, which actually wasn't the case, because he would continue to release things on later, going into March of 2020. And even now in 2024, he has been releasing singles from his former black metal style under the name Burzum parentheses new. I'm not even, he is still going. This guy is married. He has 8 kids. He changed his legal name to avoid the baggage that was associated with his past and the murder and everything. And his story is wild on its own, because remember how he was describing the whole neo-Nazi thing with Hellhammer? This guy he has a lot of the racialist, neo-pagan, environmentalist beliefs. Essentially the new Viking worship of Odin, of nature, of all this kind of stuff, anti-foreign, the driving out of foreign elements, and a return to, like, he hates modernism and wants to return back to an almost kind of ancient Viking paganism.
Interesting. But now he's chilling?
He's chilling with those beliefs.
Children.
And he, at one point in 2014, I think it was, him and his wife got arrested for like illegally buying guns, or like, no, they got guns and they were accused of planning a terrorist attack because he would post things onto Twitter and other stuff that could be incitement against Jews and Muslims.
So he found someone who matched his freak.
Yes. And I think she was a French woman, actually.
It really goes to show that there is someone out there for everyone.
Yeah.
And they have 8 children.
They have 8 children. Yeah, it's either 7 or 8, but yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for... This was wild.
This was wild. So this is something that I know that in covering things, I'm going to turn this into a YouTube episode, because you've seen how batshit this whole thing is.
Yeah. And we've worked out, he's going to make a video for this because he wrote this and used to promo the show.
Yeah. Yeah. So for all of you who stuck around to the end here, that is the end of this. If there's any other insane stories that you think would make a great episode like this,
let us know.
Because this is something that I thought that even this, like the cults are good. This isn't murder mystery, because obviously it's a story that is finished in the end.
It's more like a dark historical analysis of the black metal scene in Scandinavia.
And a mystery of why did this happen? And let's talk about, like, how the hell did this happen?
And how is it still controversial in that scene?
That's the thing that bothered me. Like,
we need to really think about that, guys. Like, we need to get to the bottom of it. That's the real mystery here.
Anyway, we're going to go ahead and end things here today. I hope that we've not made you suffer too much. Yeah.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.